A Cricketing View, an irregular podcast about cricket and other things. Episode 5. My guest today is Daniel Norcross. Daniel is a commentator for BBC Test Match Special. He also writes about cricket at various venues such as ESPNCricinfo. My conversation with Daniel was supposed to be about the 2019 English summer, a unique summer in which England hosted the World Cup and the Ashes. In this conversation, we ended up talking about the two outstanding performers of the summer. In part 2, which will be published later, we reflect on broader issues within the game. Welcome, Daniel.
Hello. How are you doing?
I'm very well. How are you?
I'm okay. It's autumn.
Have you recovered yet from the summer? I mean, it was quite a hectic summer, right?
Yeah, what it was, I sort of have now because I've had, what is it now, the 20 whatever it is of October. So yes, it's a month since I was on a freezing cold windswept roof in Taunton. My summer was bookended by beginning in Dubai because the MCC play the champion county. Correct. Before the season begins. And on this occasion it was Surrey. So I went to Dubai to commentate, and weather's been crazy everywhere around the world. We had a terrible sandstorm and had to commentate outside because there were no indoor facilities for us. No. And it was one of the most challenging and horrible experiences of my life on a microphone because I couldn't see. The sand was in my eyes and in my ears and my hair. And then a thunderstorm came and we had to protect the kit from exploding and us being electrocuted. And then 6 months later, almost to the day, 6 months later, the season ended for me in Taunton in similar circumstances on a roof because there weren't enough facilities to put the BBC up inside a box. And it was about 11 degrees and the rain was moving horizontally into us, and we had waterproof ponchos on and we were protecting the kit from rain again. It was a kind of strange way that in the middle of it all was momentous and incredible cricket, and on either side of it there was these harbingers of terrible doom, which I suppose more about the general global political and environmental state than it is about the cricket. But it was an extraordinary summer. I was at 91 days of cricket this summer and did numerous podcasts, 41 podcasts, 37 camera pieces, etc. Because it was, as you said at the beginning there, it was the first time that in England we've had a World Cup and an Ashes. And the BBC is a terrific organisation that covers every game, but it means that you tend to find yourself in an awful lot of cricket travelling between a whole load of different venues, hugely exciting. But by the end of September, I had a sty and a cold and a chest infection, and it was the first summer that I actually was happy for it to end. Of course, 4 weeks later, I'm now desperate for it to start again. But but yeah, it was full on. It was incredible, and I dare say we're going to talk about the extraordinary performances we saw and the cricketers we saw.
I do want to sort of cover England and the World Cup and the Ashes and look back at that from a little bit of distance now. But I am curious, 91 days of cricket in a summer, and so basically one weekend you might be covering a test match, and then you're on to the women's T20 tournament, and then you're on to a county championship game. That's a lot of different moods to be in.
To give you a flavour of it, I did the England-Ireland test match, which is a very different kind of test match because...
At Lord's. Yeah.
At Lord's, exactly. So it had kind of everything. You're viewing it through a very different prism. It's an inaugural game and what have you. And then the very next day that ended, I went to a Women's Ashes T20. 2 days later, the last Women's Ashes game. The very next day was the first Ashes Test match, which I did from Edgbaston. The very next day that ended, I was in Leeds doing a women's domestic T20. Then back down to Worcester because I don't know if you noticed, but amazingly, a tour match, a match between Australia and the counties, was scheduled for 2 days after the end of the first Test match. So although they could rest some players, they still only had a squad of 16. So quite a lot of the guys who played in the first Test match then had to pitch up at Worcester. So I did that game in Worcester. So it was like at one point I did about 13 days out of 16, I think, in loads of different venues. And during the World Cup, you're doing something similar because obviously, we have a rota, you have multiple commentators, but you'd find yourself doing a game in London and then traveling to Bristol for the game the day after that, or the day after plus one, and then from Bristol to Taunton, then back to London. And it was just, it was mayhem, really. I mean, there was a brief period in the middle of August when I had about 10 days off, but otherwise you're just going from one game to the other, and it's fantastic. It's an extraordinary privilege, but as you rightly point out, the kind of style and mode of commentary changes because the types of cricket that you're seeing and the expectations you're seeing. Watching women's cricket watching domestic women's T20 is a very, very different game from watching a men's Test match. And this isn't, a comment about the quality of the people playing it.
No, it's a different sport.
It's just a simple fact. It's a different sport. So your expectations are different, and you have to sort of drag your brain into thinking about everything that you're seeing differently. And a lot of this happens naturally through instinct, but sometimes when you're particularly weary, if you're doing a day-night game in Leeds and then you've got to be up first thing to do a tour match in Worcester, which is essentially these days a curated net. I mean, I remember as a kid going to watch Surrey against the West Indies or Australia, or any of the touring teams.
That was a real game, isn't it? And the counties really took pride in, trying to beat the visitors and so on.
Oh, really did, yeah. I mean, and it really mattered. And you went as a Surrey fan, and you really wanted Surrey to beat the West Indians.
Yeah.
And of course now it's nothing of the sort. It's just a way of giving some batsman some time in the middle and a pre-arranged agreement about who's going to bowl first. And when it did start raining on the last day, hey, let's just call it off, shall we, and go home. Not really thinking we could still get an hour and a half or 2 hours play in here. So your whole experience of watching it is totally different from one place to the other. Not to mention the fact that the food is vastly better when you go to a Test match, as other hotels. So there's those kind of really selfish things as well that come into it.
Yeah. It's also different levels of competitiveness now that I think about it, because in these tour matches, it's basically they're just lining up whoever they can find in the pavilion, right? It's not like it's 11 against 11 even, right? In a lot of these games.
Well, that's right. Yeah, I mean, often that is the case. In Australia tend to play them a bit more, a bit better. They tend to pick an 11. I mean, I watched India against, or I should say, the Indians, as they call themselves when they play those games, against Derbyshire in 2014. Yeah. And they did literally use every member of the tour party. I mean, the playing party, not the physios, just about. And the result was, 9 people bowled in an innings. People were retiring constantly when they got to 50. It was just sort of a way of getting everybody some time in the middle, rather meaninglessly as it happened. And I think, in a way, it rather contributed to India's lack of success on that tour, as it has done when England had done the same thing. They did the same thing under, who was it, Duncan Fletcher, I think. They did a couple of
2011.
Yeah, well, 2006-07, I think, was a really bad one, wasn't it? When England went and decided that they'd sort of curate a net and then got ambushed in the first Test, sort of lack of competitive oomph. So Jonathan Agnew talks about this a lot, and I tend to agree with him on this subject, that preparation is kind of important. The Aussies do it a little bit better. I mean, I did one of their games before the first Test. Jeez, I forgot about that. When they
was the Australians versus Australians game, right?
Correct. Yeah. I mean, and that was that was thrilling to watch, actually, because they separated these two teams of 11, and it wasn't clear that this was Australia against Australia A. It was like, six from one side and 5 from the other that were going to play in the test matches. It wasn't also batsmen against bowlers completely. So you saw guys like Michael Neser and Peter Siddle busting a gut to prove that they should be in the side, and it was properly competitive game. It was really hard batting conditions. They deliberately selected conditions that were going to be hard to play in. So they'd asked for the pitches to be green and seamer friendly, and it meant that I think 17 wickets fell on the first day. And that was fun. I wasn't anticipating enjoying that game at all, but it was really, really exciting. And you see guys like Michael Neser. I mean, I'll tell you now, I think he's a proper bowler. I'd be surprised if we don't hear a bit more from him in the next 4 or 5 years. He's signed for Surrey next year, so I'll get to see a little bit more of him because that's nearby me. But he's brisk, skiddy, moves the ball. Australia have got a lot of very good fast bowlers, a bit like India.
Well, then that settles it. I mean, then he must be, a terrific prospect. I mean, the listeners should know that Daniel is a lifelong Surrey fan. So, I mean, I'm sure he's looking forward to Hashim Amla and Michael Neser showing up next summer. Yeah, I know.
Yeah, it's going to be great.
It's been campaigning for Rory Burns and Ben Foakes to make the test team. I'm not without merit, especially in Foakes' case, I have to admit.
I would actually put a strong argument in for Burns as well. It's often... I'm a little bit with you here in that you trust your eyes when you watch cricketers, and I know you do that.
Yeah.
But also you trust the data that comes out of them and the struggles that openers have had in England, but across the world. I was asked at the end of last year to submit my 11 for the test, the best playing 11 of 2018, and this was annoyingly before New Zealand had their test series when Todd Latham scored a lot of runs. So it was in late November. I was crunching the numbers, and there was only one player in the world who averaged over 40 opening the batting in 2018 at that point, and it was Karuna Ratner.
Yeah.
So it's obviously, it's a time you can draw many conclusions from that. It could be the quality of fast bowling, the balls, the pitches, there's all sorts of things, or the quality of the batting. But Rory Burns this year ended up averaging, what was it, a 36-37, which is as high as anyone has averaged opening the batting for years in England. So he's doing something right.
I mean, since Alistair Cook, I don't think anyone's done as well as Burns.
No, but he looks frightening, doesn't he? I mean,
speaking of people who look weird, I mean, we have to. I mean, I've thought of this summer increasingly is that it has been sort of a summer of twos. This is sort of set up around two main events, and one of those main events, the World Cup, was decided by a series of bizarre, desperate, and in many cases unsuccessful twos. Like the final over of the World Cup final, the last 3 balls of the World Cup final, in fact, of the 100th over of the World Cup final, were all twos. One of them was awarded wrongly. The other 2 resulted in runouts, which caused the game to end in a tie. And then the final itself was decided because Martin Guptill was run out coming back for a second run.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, it is odd, isn't it? And actually, it's funny you should mention it because our scorer in the World Cup games, Andy Zaltzman, formerly of Cricinfo fame, is very, very hot on twos. Yeah. He sees the 2 as one of the most important run scoring options, certainly in a one-day international, because a single is sort of neither here nor there.
Uncontested.
Yeah, tick over. It's kind of like, it's almost like a sort of base requirement, isn't it? Really.
Yeah.
But a 2 is a thing that really puts pressure on your opponent, and you're right. It was a tournament of twos.
I could be wrong about this, but if I remember correctly, MS Dhoni was run out in the semi-final, going for a second run as well.
That's absolutely right. Yeah.
And the sort of the theme of the twos continues. There was Steve Smith who re-emerged thunderously on the Test match stage, and Jofra Archer who emerged fully formed, complete fast bowler in the international game. I think we should spend some time discussing those two players because, you were talking earlier about Rory Burns looking odd and ugly and weird, and Steve Smith, especially to English eyes, probably looks really, really, really odd.
Yeah, I mean beyond odd. I mean, or dare I say repulsive? It's let me try and put that in context. I don't mean repulsive, but when the Test series
well, you can say repulsive. It's not getting out. He's there. you can't do anything about it.
No, you can't. And actually, the reason for being annoyed by it is it's not what you might think. It's not the sort of base requirement that you want England to beat Australia. Although, it has to be said that within what I do, the hardest contest to retain neutrality and objectivity in is England against Australia for reasons that are just cultural and you've been brought up with for so long. It's a knee jerk. It's hard to resist, But when you do the job that I do, you can't afford to let that infect you. And most of the time it doesn't. In England play Sri Lanka and Pakistan, South Africa, and New Zealand, etc. It doesn't really enter your head. But with Smith, it has a double effect, which is that it renders your own commentary dreadful because, look, there were a couple of times I was commentating and he was out to all intents and purposes. You get a sense. We have the best view in the house. Right? We're elevated and we're looking down from behind the bowler's arm or the ball coming towards us. And when it's behind the bowler's arm, you see it perfectly. So when you've done it over and over again, you have a kind of instinct for, that ball's going to get you out. You can see it happening and you can see the body shape of the batsman. And I can see clearly in my head now, more than 4 or 5 times, but one specific occasion when Stuart Broad bowled a ball that jagged back and kept low. I think it was at Old Trafford. And I was directly behind the bowler's arm at the time. And Smith had got into his usual position. He'd moved across. And there was no way on God's earth that wasn't clattering into middle and off stump. And there was no way he could get his bat on it. Yeah. And I was up for the LBW, and the ball was worked to mid-wicket for a single. Easy as you like. Yeah. And this is the point at which you realise you're dealing with greatness. So in the first test at Edgbaston, when he got the twin hundreds, everybody that was English or even, not Australian was wandering around in between different commentary boxes, just turning to everybody who's there. Because you can imagine everybody's there, Michael Holding, Shane Warne, Ricky Ponting, etc., Vaughan, Tuffers. And you're just saying to them off air, how do you get him out? What do you do? And people are scratching their heads and going, God, it's really boring, isn't it? I mean, it's basically half the balls, nothing can happen except some runs. It's only one half of the balls that's worth watching, And then as the summer progressed, you started to realize that this was nothing to do with what you want to have happen or whether you speculate on how you get him out. It's more marveling in something you've never seen before. I don't know if I'll see it again. Marnus Labuschagne or Labuschagne started to emulate his technique a little bit. He started to be a little bit more Smithy, and not just in the leaves, but in his trigger movements and where his body went. So maybe people will copy the technique. But as you were watching it, you sort of realized that this was an incredible fusion of hand-eye coordination, which he's obviously got. But, he had, if you think hand-eye coordination is innate, well, he had that when he was 21, 22, and he was getting out to that ball that Stuart Broad bowled, So there's dedication. There's a sheer amount of time that he's spent honing this technique. There's this really unusual existence that he seems to have that no other cricketer that I know, not even Kohli, and Kohli is obsessive, but Smith gets himself into a bubble. I'll give you a quick story to indicate just how dedicated Smith is to his art. I met a fellow commentator, Australian female commentator. I won't say who, just to save blushes, for having a drink after the third or fourth day of one of these games, and we were chatting away. And she said, "Oh, yeah, we heard this tapping noise on my ceiling last night," and she was sleeping underneath Steve Smith. And it turned out, she found out that it was Steve Smith because it was all revealed on a WhatsApp group, that it was Steve Smith practicing his stance. He wasn't shadow batting. He was practicing his stance in his bedroom at 12:30 at night. And that is visualization gone nuts, isn't it? I mean, this is a person who, when he's not playing, when he's not actually out in the middle, he has to have a bat in his hand. He talked during the series about how if he sometimes looks down, and if something's not quite right, he doesn't feel quite right, and he can feel not quite right for half an hour while he's batting until he's actually got his hands right. He has to be entirely sort of part of the pitch, the ball, the conditions, the place, like he inhabits it in a way that I've seen no other batsman do. And by the end of the summer, I got to tell you, I was just in complete awe of him and was relishing watching him. So I had some kind of Damascene conversion, which was probably good for me. I don't know what your take on him is, but I just don't think I've ever seen anything quite as exceptionally suited to Test cricket as Steve Smith.
The thing I find just completely compelling about Smith is how completely he has problematized batting. He doesn't have a technique. He seems to have a compendium of solutions. I've seen him. He was in India in 2017, and he made an extraordinary 100 in the third innings at Pune. I think he was dropped like once or twice, but I mean, Ashwin and Jadeja were turning the ball square. It was quick turn. It was the Test match where Steve O'Keefe took 12 wickets.
Yes.
It was that kind of pitch.
Yes, I remember it.
And Smith made 109 out of, I think, something like just under 300. And nobody else made 35. And that was against spin, right? So he wasn't shuffling, and it was a completely different method, right? He never shuffles across when he's facing spinners. His first movement is always forward, right? Unless he's going back to hit something. And it was like you watch that Smith and you watch the Smith at Edgbaston, and it's like watching two completely different players who are absolute masters, of two completely different ways of batting. It's an extraordinary thing. I mean, Smith, I've seen nobody else, maybe Inzamam at his absolute best, who can take the same ball and hit it behind square on the leg side one time and pass the left hand of cover the next time.
Yeah.
And get two both times.
I think you put your finger on it. It's about problem solving, and where that comes from, I think, is from a deep lack of ego. Yeah. I mean, one of the things that's really noticeable about Smith is that he doesn't strut. He doesn't try to dominate the opposition by the force of his charisma or personality. Everything you see is out in the open. All those ridiculous leaves and all those incredible faces that he pulls and all the kind of replaying of the ball is him in a really brilliantly naive, childlike way, being entirely in the moment, combating the ball, not the bowler, which is so utterly different from, say, for example, Viv Richards, who would command the stage and the presence and the way he would walk out. Indeed, Virat Kohli, would look to get on top of certain bowlers, looks to show extraordinary respect to Jimmy Anderson, when he came over and solved his problems last year with the bat in England. It was all about seeing off Anderson and then taking the others apart. With Smith, the bowler is irrelevant. It's the ball each time. That's all he ever thinks about. I just think that's an incredibly admirable quality to have, because it means that he's always questioning. Well, say questioning. He's always asking himself to be better and to think about what it is that he's been doing wrong, and to give himself more and more options. It's an extraordinary dedication to his art, which is at odds with how he arrived in England as a villain, because in a very simplistic way. The sandpaper gate thing had happened, and so people booed and all that kind of stuff. A less villainous man, it's hard to imagine, really. I mean, he's just a marvel, really, to watch, and to watch all those things you're talking about, the problem solving, to watch all that unfold in his head. You watch him assess a pitch and how he's going to deal with it when he goes out there. And you see it in his eyes. You see it in his reaction to each ball. The face he makes if he's beaten by one, gives so much to the bowler, doesn't it? I mean, ordinarily, you would think, oh, I've got a moral victory there as a bowler. Well, not one bit of it with Smith. All that's happening is he's just living the experience of facing the ball very publicly, which is beautifully naive, but also, if you think about it, kind of terrifying, because it means if his ego's not getting in the way, then his just pure dedication to his art mixed with his honed hand-eye coordination, I believe it's vastly improved, because he faces hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of balls a day. On the rare occasions when he gets out, he goes and nets. Sort of reminds me a bit of Tendulkar, with the business of just facing as many net balls as he possibly can, just to be out there feeling the bat in his hand, in stark contrast to someone like David Gower, who barely netted at all. And you sort of wonder what players with more natural ability might have been able to do. I mean, I suppose it's a ridiculous thing to wonder, really, because that's about character and personality and all the other things that go with it. But if you allied incredible natural ability with Smith's total monomania, what would you get? I mean, it's hard to imagine anything better than Smith, but possibly
probably get Bradman.
Well, you might. That's the thing.
No, but it's interesting you bring up the monomania, because like the thing about Sandpaper Gate, which always struck me, is that so Smith got it in the neck for like presiding over Sandpaper Gate.
Yes.
And I wonder sort of how much the monomania had to do with that. Like, it's like you watch him bat, and you almost get the feeling that he couldn't care less what else is going on. He really, really wants to bat well.
Yeah, that's it. You can't get inside his head. One of the things that people on commentary with me, Michael Vaughan was big on this, and Phil Tufnell and Jonathan Agnew. They repeatedly said England aren't getting inside his head. They've got to do things to get inside his head. And I knew what they meant. Yeah. I personally didn't 100% agree with them, because I didn't think that it was going to make. I thought getting inside his head, or trying to get inside his head, was actually going to put the bowlers off focusing on what they needed to do. Yeah. So, for example, Joe Root placed, and he did this in Australia as well, you may recall. He placed really straight mid-on next to the non-striker, because there was an idea that Smith hates to see somebody there in his eye line, Yeah. But what you're doing is you're taking a fielder out of a place where the ball's going to go, and you have scant fielders anyway to deal with the best batsman in the world. So you've now made it even that little bit easier for him to score, because he doesn't fall for mind games. His brain is too solid for that. So at the end of it, I didn't get any kind of idea of how you can devise a plan to him. I don't know if you did. I mean, a plan above and beyond containment and waiting for a mistake. I didn't really get that. He said that every batsman's vulnerable at the beginning of their innings, and he did play and miss at Old Trafford a few times at the start of his innings, because he is human. But I don't know that there's. I don't know that you could see a weakness in his game, and getting in his head certainly made no bloody difference from what I could see.
Yeah. I mean, the one guy who troubled him was, the next guy I want to talk about, is, Archer, and Archer is. I don't think we appreciate just how much of a phenomenon Archer is. I mean, I've seen, like, now for like nearly 20 years, I've seen fast bowlers. And even like fast bowlers who played 40, 50 test matches, there are always things they can't do, right? So India used to have fast bowlers who couldn't bowl round the wicket to left-handers, and they couldn't bring the ball back into the left-hander, right arm bowlers. And so basically, their only real option was to try to get them, caught at the wicket or caught in the slip cordon. They could only ever really challenge the outside edge of the bat. And Archer comes in, and anything you ask him, anything Joe Root asked him to do, he did it at such a high level in all sports, in all forms. It's extraordinary.
It is extraordinary. Yeah, it is extraordinary. But I want to ask you a question, because a thought has been mulling in my mind, and maybe it's a bit too simplistic, but it's a combination of factors with Archer, I think. I think there's a similar dedication to what he does. I think he thinks very hard about it, and he obviously watches a lot of cricket. I mean, the business with his tweets, always having a tweet for the required occasion, is because he clearly watches it always, So he's absorbing an awful lot, a little bit like Smith.
These are from like 4 or 5 years ago. So
correct, exactly, yeah, exactly. So it's not, it's when he was really young.
Yeah.
But I think there's something of his grounding in T20, and the fact he's played so much T20, is that he's had to adapt to a whole bunch of different situations. That bowling in T20, I know it's not about taking wickets so much, the ball is different, your fields are different, I get all that.
Yeah.
But it is about being able to produce at will a different kind of ball to a batsman in a situation.
Yeah.
And so he's so used to variations. When I think about when I was growing up and watching bowlers come into the side, Paul Allott or Graham Dilley or even Bob Willis, with the exception of Ian Botham, fast bowlers came in and they had, as you say, they had a way to bowl. And they would sometimes their first game would go really well. John Lever picked up wickets in India, didn't he, in his first game?
Right.
But essentially, John Lever was a very, very good bowler who bowled a couple of very, very good balls, which he could repeat over and over again.
Yeah.
Whereas Archer has come from a very different grounding in which he's had to bowl slower balls, faster balls, slower bouncers, cutters. And I just wonder how much that flexibility of approach, if you ally that with a very, very high level of sporting intelligence and a very massive keenness to be better, and talent and a terrific physique, means that he can adapt Test cricket actually more easily in a way than somebody who's come out of 3-day county cricket, where it's a very different game from 5-day cricket. And players were actually quite limited, I think. Bowlers were quite limited in a way, fast bowlers, in the way they bowled in the 70s and 80s.
Yeah.
In a way that Archer is a product of this new way of having to adapt as a fast bowler.
Yeah, I'm sure there's something to that. I did an episode with Freddie Wild and Tim Wigmore about their book about T20, and in that and in the conversation, I sort of got for the first time an account of what it means to be a good T20 bowler, and the answer is not some line or some length, right? The answer, it seems, is that T20 is a highly tactical game, unlike Test cricket, where in the sense that every ball you have to think of something and you have to anticipate what the batsman might do, right? Whereas in Test cricket, most of the time, the batsman knows what you're going to do. And, as a bowler, what the batsman can do. And games are won and lost when, what you can do is so good that even though the batsman knows it's coming, there's nothing they can do about it, right? Whereas in T20, apparently, the trick is to be able to constantly outguess the batsman, to do what the batsman does not expect.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. That is definitely a skill, right? That's not random.
Absolutely. Did you read Harry Gurney talking about how he approaches bowling?
I did. And Subhash did an interview with him.
Right. I mean, it's just a terrific way of
thinking about it. Yeah.
How you're going to bowl, to be able to bluff with the field in a place where the batsman's expecting something, but to be able to have three different balls for that field at each time.
Yeah.
I think that's a kind of adaptability that has assisted Archer. But of course, that's only part of the story, isn't it? Because he's also the spell he bowled at Lord's to Steve Smith, which was a really long spell, about 8 overs, culminating in him being hit. And I dare say, it's been talked to death, but it was lightning fast and it was extraordinary, but it was totally right for the circumstances. And then he turned up at the next game at Heading on a pitch that just did not suit that style of bowling and bowled about 88 miles an hour. He didn't bowl at 83 or 84 or 85.
Yeah.
They all bowled really quick, but differently, which is kind of extraordinary, isn't it? I mean, when your variations and you can bowl sort of every mile per hour down to about 78, it's a little bit disconcerting, and I guess that's why he looked like the fully fledged bowler, because the speed at which he adapted and recognized the different conditions was what was more exciting, actually, in many ways, than the balls that he actually bowled, wasn't it? It was seeing his game intelligence was thrilling, and it was just for me, though. I mean, I've got to say one thing. This is a little bit of a diversion, but when he played at Old Trafford, and on that first day, it was probably very difficult to assess this from a distance, but they were the worst conditions for playing cricket in that I have ever witnessed, notwithstanding Dubai. It was about a 45, 50 mile per hour gusts going horizontally across the field. Yeah. And it was, awful.
Yeah, that was the day when the bails were flying off, isn't it?
That's right. That's right. I had to commentate for 4 minutes while they were trying to put the bails on, and bags of cheesy Watsits and Mars bars were flying across the ground. It was just hellish. And he didn't get above 80, 84 miles an hour at most throughout the day. And instantly, people started to criticize. People started to say, I'm not sure. He's a Bayesian. Can he handle difficult, vicious conditions in England? So,
it's the cricket version of, can Lionel Messi can do it on a wet night in Stoke,
You've got it. You've got it. And it's to me, it was facile. It was just ridiculous. Because it had nothing to do with the fact that he was Bayesian. I mean, this guy's been playing cricket in England for years, been playing for Sussex. That's how he's playing for England now, because he's qualified by living in England long enough, So this wasn't a matter of him not being able to adapt to it. It was that those conditions were epically dreadful. I mean, really, really terrible, in which it's virtually impossible to showcase your talent. He still didn't go for any runs. He just didn't look dangerous. But then, I don't know how anybody would look dangerous on that day. It was one of those weird ones when it's quite a good toss to win and bat, even though batting was horrible as well, because your bat was flying around in your hand as the wind was gusting through,
Game intelligence is one thing, it's one thing to know in your mind what you need to do. That's an achievement. That's really hard to do, and to know that at the level of Test cricket is like, I always think of it in terms of like someone who gets a math prodigy who gets a PhD at 21. It's that kind of ability. But it's not just that. It's that having worked out what you need to do to actually do it as well as he does is extraordinary. I mean, he bowled spells where, he bowled like McGrath, nagging away back of a length on the fourth stump. Challenging the outside edge, challenging the off stump, and then he would bowl like 25 overs for 40 runs or whatever it is. And then he bowled other spells like Thomo, where he's basically, getting it to rear up at the batsman from, back of a length. He's constantly hitting the bat near the handle. He's getting batsmen to fend. He's the only one who pushed Smith off balance in the whole series, really.
That's absolutely true. I mean, there are big problems with that because as a captain, you look at him and you think you've effectively got sort of 3 or 4 bowlers in one,
Yeah.
and so he's always the person you need because he's the person, he bowls to every occasion.
Yeah.
So you can really understand why Root bowled him as many overs as he did, but he's still human. I mean,
Yeah.
he was his body surely cannot take that much. It can take more than Mark would because his action's so different. He doesn't get off the ground, much like Wasim Akram.
Yeah.
Wasim Akram said something amazing to me, and I wonder if it's the same with Jofra Archer. He said that actually bowling people think that the bouncer is an effort ball.
Yeah.
He said to me that actually the bouncer was the non-effort ball because of his action. He found that easier to bowl. He found the bowling the full-length ball was his effort ball because he had to reach for that fuller length with his action, whereas a kind of leap action, it's an effort ball to bang it into the pitch. And in a way, you could see that with Archer, couldn't you? That he could produce the bouncer at will. I wonder, with that action, I think he's going to be able to bowl more overs, and I think he's probably going to get fewer problems with his back and his knees.
Yeah.
Shoulder might be an issue, I guess, and elbow, which I think was what Wasim struggled with more than anything else, wasn't it?
Yeah.
But the action's got to, I think, assist also his variation, because when you look at someone like Wood, who's got a very pronounced leap into the crease, you've got a lot more tells with that. Whereas Jofra can look, I'm calling him Jofra Archer, can look like he's that much more dangerous because the batsman has that less time to be able to guess where the ball's going, or instinctively to know where it's going, because it's coming from the same action and that run through skiddy action that he does. So it sort of adds an extra yard of pace in a way to the reaction time, doesn't it?
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting you say that because Subhash did an interview with Harry Gurney where he said that in T20 apparently, like Gurney and Malinga and Bumrah and all these people, they have this view that it's the Yorker which is actually the effort ball.
Yeah.
Rather than because there you have to sort of strain to deliver it fuller than you would naturally, and apparently the modifications that requires in terms of your balance are what make it such an effort ball.
That would figure with what Wasim was saying.
Yeah. But coming back to, I mean, I want to move on to the other two players I have in mind. But coming back to Archer, I was struck, maybe it was just me, but I was struck by this disconnect, between, on the one hand, the way the England management sees Archer. I mean, it seems to me that they think of him like a diamond, like he's 24 karat, like priceless diamond. I mean, you just have to hear like Joe Root talk about him and say, well, we shouldn't really expect him to average 12 every series.
Yeah.
And then on the other hand, you have the public prints where, there's all this doubt. Oh, is he going to fizzle out? Is he this? I remember Archer sent out a tweet, and nowadays you have all these players sending out tweets so you can get some sort of hint into what they're thinking. After one of the test matches, and he said, I can't move. And I remember there were more than a few people commenting on, what, you're 23, how can you not move?
All 25.
Yeah, I mean, so there's this, they're in two different universes. Thankfully, the England management, I think, for all of us, I love watching him. So from my point of view, thankfully, the England management seem to be in absolutely no doubt that they've got like basically an all-time great in the making.
Well, let me just go on that. And you could tell that they knew that. Firstly, because they selected him in a very solid one-day squad that had played together for 4 years and had got to number one. Secondly, you may recall he bowled 4 overs, I think it was, against Pakistan in a rain-ruined match at the Oval in the first one-day international. They were effectively warm-ups. England played 5 against Pakistan in
Yes.
May. And he bowled those 4 overs, and he was rested for the next 2, I think, one-day internationals immediately.
Yeah.
So, they'd already seen enough. They'd seen him get Waqar Zaman caught at slip of an absolute snorter.
Yeah.
And they thought, right, well, he's playing. Let's make damn sure that he's fit. Which was extraordinary, I guess. And as for the general public, I'm going to get onto slightly shaky ground here, perhaps, but there's a couple of things. The general public don't see much of Jofra Archer because they wouldn't have seen him playing for England, and that's how you would see if you are in England, because you don't have a lot of cricket to watch other than international cricket, really, that's visible. Secondly, there is the issue of, without put too fine a point on it, the fact that he's Bayesian. I know he's British too, but because of that, there's a sort of easier, lazier trope that goes around, which is exactly the thing you were saying about, Messi on a wet Wednesday at Stoke in February. So, this is sort of ill-informed nonsense, but that's kind of why it's there, I think. It's born of ignorance, because the fact is that he is remarkable. He's part of a series of, I think we're living in an era of terrific fast bowling. When has India had Jasprit, Mohammad Shami and Bhuvaneshwar Kumar and Umesh Yadav and what have you? And, when has New Zealand had Bolt and Southey and Henry, and Australia, and we'll talk about some of them, have got among the best bowlers they've had in a long while. South Africa with Rabada and Gidi, etc. So, you're looking at a golden age of fast bowling, aren't you? And he is, I think, he's up there with all of them, if not beyond. Bumrah is another one, I think, is in that kind of world, isn't he? That has done a lot in T20, has an economical action, extraordinary action.
There's also a stress factor right now, which is not good.
Yeah, the problem is he's going to stress certain parts of his body because he doesn't have the run-up, does he? And this is always been a bit of a bother, a bit like Mark Wood's run-up. But broadly speaking, you know what I mean? You're talking about people who've got to have a great innate sense of what it is they want to do, incredible control, bowl it incredibly fast, in a relatively economical way, so they can repeat it over and over again, and posing unique problems to batsmen. And we've seen it. I maintain that if you took Smith out of the Australian side, you could basically have played that Ashes series, and whoever Smith was playing for was winning. It was as simple as that. Because the bowling attacks on both sides are so fantastic.
The runs would be enough. He would put up enough runs for them to kill the opposition, basically. And it's not just the runs he scores; it's the runs that get scored when he's there. It's kind of ridiculous. Speaking of, those are both, like, Smith is basically, I think, a once in a century player, and Archer is probably going to end up at least as a once in a generation player.
England's never seen a bowler like it. I would argue. I don't think.
Well, maybe Fred Truman was probably the last one, right? Going by what Fred Truman said about Fred Truman.
I would say that. I didn't see enough of Fred Truman to know. I am 50, and in my lifetime,
I didn't see any of Fred Truman.
No. I've seen bits on TV, and I've had first-hand accounts on people, but they're always unreliable, aren't they? Because it's sport and people are misty-eyed. But I guess the nearest that I saw was late-era John Snow. It was a terrific fast bowler, but from an England perspective, not seen anything as fast, as wily, as just he's the all-round package. So yeah, once in 30 years, once in 50. I mean, from an England point of view, certainly. From a world point of view, yeah, maybe 1 in 20 years. Yeah.
This concludes the first part of my conversation with Daniel Norcross. If you'd like to listen to the second part, please subscribe to this podcast at the podcast service of your choice. The podcast is also available on YouTube. Please see the show notes for the links.